So welcome to Dose of Deborah, Rehab for the Heart. I am your host, Dr. Deb Howell, and I'm so delighted to have my guest today, Barbara Karnes. And Barbara is an RN. She's internationally recognized as an author, speaker, thought leader, and expert on end-of-life care and the dynamics of dying. Barbara was recognized in 2018 as a Hospice Innovator by the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and was named the 2015 International Humanitarian Woman of the Year by the World Humanitarian Awards. Barbara has published several books, and we'll give you information on how to get them and where to find her. But two of them in particular I have with me right now. One is Gone From My Sight, and the other one is You Need Care Too. And today I'd really like to focus on the healthcare professional. So I've asked Barbara if she, could share from her experiences as a nurse in practice and as an educator, as an author, right, on this subject matter. And so she's here, and I'm really pleased and honored to have you, Barbara. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So how did this all begin for you, with just writing about it and, getting in to this area of expertise?
Well, I started out as a hospice nurse when hospice wasn't even Medicare certified. So we didn't really know much about end of life. And we learned about how people die by being at the bedside consistently. And one night I was on call and a family called. They were scared and upset. So I went to the house and mom is in the bedroom and I have looked at her and I see what's going on. And now I have the family in the living room and I'm explaining to them the signs of approaching death and what mom is doing and that this is normal, this is natural, reassuring them. And one of the daughters was taking notes. And I thought, oh my goodness, she shouldn't have to be sitting there writing down what I'm saying. So that weekend I went home and I sat down. This is before computers. It was when we had yellow legal pads, remember those? And I wrote out what I wanted a family to know about approaching death. And I wrote it at a level that I knew people under stress would be able to read quickly and understand and find comfort in some really scary knowledge. So after I wrote that, I printed it and I gave it to all of my families. And that booklet took on a life of its own. And there's 30 million copies out around the world now, and it's in 12 languages. So it really took on a life of its own, which tells me how much it is needed. One of the big things that I learned from an end of life standpoint is that taking care of someone at end of life is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. But most people don't know that. And so our work in end of life is judged on how people get better unless we teach them otherwise. And so to have a booklet that shows the signs of approaching death says to the family, mom's doing what she's supposed to be doing. Nothing pathological is happening, and I would reassure families, mom's doing a good job. This is how you die, and she's doing it well. And that reassurance neutralizes the fear that all of us bring to the bedside when someone we care about is dying.
Yeah, because there's, first of all, there's so many feelings involved in, they're all over the place, right? And but then we don't know what the facts are, right? We are trying to figure out, like, in the moment what's happening, and the timing of things that's happening, and so the open-ended uncertainty is frightening to people.
Well,
You know?
we don't have any role models on what it's like to die. All we have is television and the movies. And in television or the movies, mom says something very profound and she's dead. Well, that's not how people die, but that's the role model we bring unless someone teaches us otherwise.
Yeah, and one of the challenges, I mean, to know when someone is close to end of life, and then that gray area, because I'm in the inpatient acute rehab, and we've had folks come in who've had diagnosis, especially like with cancer, and they'll come in to rehabilitate, to get stronger, to either start treatment, continue treatment, right? Or maybe no other intervention as far as chemo or radiation or anything like that, or surgery, but just to have a better quality of life. But then here's where the tricky part comes, because you talk about getting better, whereas in hospice we're transitioning and life is ending, right, as we know it. And this space, right, where those plans change, and the patient, that was not their goal, right? They come to rehab and the assessment, and they want to get stronger, and then somehow this is not going to be the thing, and they ultimately are going to transition to hospice. That's a tricky space, because it's not clearly defined anymore as like the end of life initially, right? Because we want to get well. So the emotions that go on in the individual, but also with the practitioner, it's such a delicate dance. And to find compassion, to find acceptance, and peace of mind, peace in your heart, and as a practitioner, to help our patients not be disappointed with themselves. Because I have a specific example that I'm thinking of in particular, where I had a lady who was so set. Actually, I have two ladies who were so gung-ho, so set on rehabilitating and going back to do more treatment, and ultimately their bodies took a downward, right, trajectory, and they were hard on themselves. First of all, the patient initially was hard on themselves. They felt that they let themselves down. And so this area of end of life is an area of specialty in itself, right? But when you're in this rehab, get better space, and that's not going to be the thing that plays out, that is a very interesting space to be in. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to any of that, because it is finding a way to be present to what is. Not liking it, but the peace. It's the peace in the transition. It's the compassion. It's the, it's working with the facts, working with the feelings, and And one of the things I know for sure is that a patient also may have a certain perspective, and family has another perspective.
Well,
Yeah.
there's so much game playing and untruths in end of life from a medical perspective. I'm going out on a limb here, but it's really hard for the medical profession whose focus is on fixing, whose focus is on getting better, that when the medical profession can't achieve those goals, those professionals carry with them a sense of failure, because their goal is, I'm going to rehab this person, I'm going to get this person better. And so I think there's game playing within that healthcare professional's mind, in that I can do this, I can get them better, I can get them stronger. And when they can't, then they feel they've failed. And when they can't, they're in uncharted territory, because they haven't been trained on how to shift gears, on how to have an end of life conversation, on how to provide comfort and direction when they know that the end result will be death. And so we need to train our healthcare professionals on how to have that talk, on how to bring that compassion forward, on how to recognize that just because you can't heal the physical body doesn't mean there isn't healing to be done. We can heal the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual parts of a person from the time that we can't heal the physical body. And that becomes our work and our focus.
You know, as you say that, and this one particular lady I remember her disappointment in herself, because she just thought that she could fight this and beat it. And I remember hanging out with her, sitting at her bedside, and, you know, talking to her about her sense in her mind that she failed herself and that she failed others. And to bring it around to giving herself credit for the effort that she made, because I can tell you what she went through with bouts of nausea, and then she would just, you know, throw up, be nauseated, not eat it. She was so emaciated, she was so thin, yet her spirit was so like just willing to override the physical body that was, you know, really challenged. And I was recounting her effort, you know, just, hey, can you see what you have done to contribute to your, I mean, this effort. So you're to speak like she just kind of gave up. I said, you didn't give up. And I said, but sometimes things just are as they are. And I think part of that discussion that I had, I was able to have because, and it brought her to a place of compassion for herself, right? To find compassion for herself. And ultimately the recognition, because she was also afraid. There was fear in there of how this was all going to play out. And what ultimately happened for her, and it was such a beautiful experience for me as well to be with her in this space, was the peace she was able to have to feel empowered to still make a decision, right, on how she wanted these next steps. And what had happened was we started to talk about that. because they were being discharged home to hospice. And she says, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make phone calls, and I'm going to speak to those that I love, and I'm going to just do a few certain things to have some closure for herself, and ultimately that's exactly what she did. And she passed probably like 3 or 4 days after she was discharged from the hospital. But she thanked me for the peace that she had, because she was in her own inner turmoil with disappointment. And I think that's part of when we all want a sense of peace when all is said and done, right? And I was able to have this conversation though, because I went through this with my best friend, who I was at her bedside, and everything was very sudden and uncertain, and a very short period of time, from diagnosis to death within 2 weeks. And I had a week with her, over 6 days. And so it allowed me to kind of be there personally, but be there professionally, so I could like look at facts and still acknowledge my feelings. And I think so as professionals, we have to kind of recognize both are in play. And we, just because we're a professional doesn't mean that we don't have feelings to this, and our own personal feelings, whatever may be triggered in our own, in our own bodies, that may have us feeling emotional and even tearing up, because it's okay to cry. I mean, I cried with her. I held her hand and we cried. So I think being human, realizing our humanity in caregiving, in professional caregiving, is a big part of this. And I want to, and it makes me think of, as you say that, in your book, it says, we don't have all the answers, right? That was one of the pieces you wrote here. And it says, sometimes it is more helpful to listen to a person's story than to tell them how to solve their problems, even if you think you know the solutions. Sometimes just sitting there in silence is the best thing we can give. Yet we often create stress for ourselves because we can't fix problems or have no idea how to help, So.
Well, most of us got into the healthcare arena because we're fix-it personalities. We're caring and we want to help and fix things. And that's the personality that gets drawn to the medical arena. And when we can't fix it, when we can't bring the comfort in our mind that we're trying to achieve, then we as healthcare workers take that inside of us. And then we feel, well, I'm not doing a good enough job because I didn't get this done. And that's in taking care of ourselves in this work. We have to recognize that we're always doing the best we can, but the best we can may not fix it. And to not go away and think, well, I didn't do enough. It wasn't good enough. We always do the best we can. Now, as healthcare workers, particularly those who work in end of life, another component is we can't take on our patients' emotions or their problems. We can, with our knowledge, address and try and help them solve it, but we can't carry it. We can't make it ours, and we certainly can't take it home with us. It leaves us when we leave the bedside, because one of the big traps for us fix-it personalities is to take our work and our emotions home with us and carry them, and they're not ours to carry. And if we do that, we'll be selling dresses, in 5 years, because we won't be able to stay in this work?
So as you say that, two things come to mind for me. One is the take it on, take it in, take it home, right? That part that leads to burning out, the compassion fatigue and all that. And then the other part is the desensitization, the depersonalization, okay? Because I know that I have personally experienced the compassion fatigue and burnout. And I've also, with my friend's situation in the hospital, and she was a healthcare professional, in this expertise of end of life, but she wasn't in end of life expert. Her surroundings. She was in a critical care bed, right? So it wasn't officially sort of in that space of hospice. They made that bed, but to be a hospice bed, but she was really in a critical care room, right? In intensive care. And what I realized was that this lack of sensitivity that can sort of be a protection, you know, that we lose touch. So we lose touch with the why that we're even doing this in the first place, because and I don't believe it's necessarily conscious, that people are aware that they're this mechanical way of doing things, that they've lost touch as a means to keep themselves going, right? To keep functioning, right? We have processes in place that need to get done, right? Boxes that need to be checked, right? Budgets that we need to work within and all that. So all the logistics of healthcare are in play. And the individual still, these two ways of sort of what's showing up, right, is the one that's going to burn out because of this burden that they're carrying in their system. But the other one can also burn out, but they will be blindsided by their burnout because even though they're depersonalized and desensitized, we don't realize that we can vicariously pick things up, right? Because that's the nature of human connection, energetically, right? So we have to be more mindful in practice about reflection on why we are doing the things that we're doing, that we're not just doing something to do it.
I think we walk a tightrope. It's a very thin line of being that desensitized, not getting into the personal or the emotional level, just doing and moving forward, and the other side of the line is being too emotionally involved. And so we walk this line of having compassion, of being able to recognize the fear, the emotional needs of our patient, address them, and yet not carry them. You know, that's the thin line. And for some healthcare workers, they might as well have one of those full face shields, body armor on, because they're not going to let anything come in. And that is as destructive, as you pointed out, as the person that is totally open and totally vulnerable. So again, it goes back to, we have to find balance in the work that we do, and to not lose sight of the humanity that every disease every unhealthy person has. We are people that have diseases, not diseases that people have. And if we can stay focused on the people that have diseases, I think that it will do wonders for our healthcare system. But at the same time, we have to take care of ourselves and not take all of that energy home with us. It's not ours to carry. We're just there to support and guide, but not to carry it.
Yeah, so in that, with the experience that I had, the period of time that I had with my friend passing, immediately after her passing, I was charged with the responsibility of starting an inpatient oncology rehab program immediately. So as soon as I went back to work, everything was go. And I remember this taught me a lot about this being able to actually take a look at what's going on, because when I went back, I was so strong when I was at the hospital with her, to make sure everything would be carried out in the way that she would want it to be, right? As much as we could, because we'd been friends 30 years and we were in the military together, and she had adult children, so they deferred to me. But coming back to my work environment, all of a sudden I had this angst that I had no idea was going to be present. I had a level of angst that had me where I didn't know what tomorrow would hold. Because what happened to her happened so quickly and so suddenly, out of the blue, I felt blindsided. And then now, as I go back to work, I'm like, how am I going to function like this? And it took me by surprise, this level of angst. And then having to start this oncology program, now I had to start the conversation with patients around cancer, and my friend had passed from cancer, and to keep myself open and alert, and I am raw and vulnerable, super, super, super. And I remember that I would start to speak and ask questions, and then I would well up at times. And what I ultimately would do in the beginning was to ask my patients just for a moment that I recently, had a loss in my life. And so in that moment, I allowed myself to feel the grief, to feel, just to be human myself. And then I could compose, and then to have a really honest conversation with patients, because there's fear in the air a lot. There's often fear and all the questions that we don't have answers to. And I think to be as honest as I could was to say, we just don't have all the answers. And the best thing we can do is to stay present to ourselves, what we're feeling, because there can be all kinds of feelings, and anger, and especially if, like I mentioned before, about family members might have one way of feeling, and a patient has another way of feeling, and each individual family member has a different view. So you can see the dynamic of uncertainty and all kinds of things that can make it very complex around this discussion, right? But as a professional, it was important for me to honor my own vulnerability and to recognize my own limits also, so that I could speak to it and not suppress it. And the other thing I learned about that too is because we had a questionnaire that needed to be filled out and answered, and I felt that there was sometimes a bit of pushback or avoidance in asking certain things, because for the individual practitioner who has unresolved emotions around any loss in their life, or a family member, that's something that their interaction with a patient may trigger that emotion, that they will stay away from that. They're not going to go there. You know? Yeah.
Right. Well, when your friend died, you were an absolute open wound, a gaping open wound that was so painful that in hindsight, you would have been better in your own emotional well-being if you hadn't have had to start a new program that dealt with end of life, because you were so vulnerable at that time. As grief is an open wound that gradually heals over and forms a scar. The scar is always there. And, you know, if you touch a scar, it feels different than the rest of you. And that's grief. But in the beginning, it's this huge open gaping wound. And that's where you were. And through your strength of personality and character, you were able to move forward and work with your program. Some might not have been able to do that, but it was made more challenging because of the fact that you were so newly grieving.
You know, I've been doing a lot of mindful work for many years, you know, over a decade. So I knew that just learning how to just stay in my heart and really accept and be witness to my own process, be witness to my own process. And it was really challenging, because I also had a great deal of sadness. Like, I still have sadness sometimes, you know, where I feel it just pops up.
Mm-hmm.
It just will boop.
Yep, that's great.
And I allow myself to, if I get teary, let myself be teary. Maybe I go outside, drink some water, like whatever it is, because, you know, we are taking in with our interactions. And again, this is a vicarious nature of human interaction, right? That we can see with all professions, as far as in a direct care, where paramedics, you know, emergency medicine, where these traumatic situations are like, you just do it. You just do it, right? You are in emergency response mode, right? And so it's all about just do it, save the person's life. And so while we're in that process, whatever is coming on board, our bodies doesn't register till later. And it might look like restless sleep, right? It might look like agitation. It could look like sadness, could look like just whatever it looks like. But everyone is different in how things are, and things are cumulative. That's the other thing, right? Things are cumulative. So as
one of the things that we have to do when we're in situations like this is we have to download. We have to get it out. We have to find not someone who has answers, because there aren't any answers. You'd have to find a listener, someone that will understand what you're feeling, what you've experienced, but you have to get it out, and you have to get it out right away. I would say to my nurses, my hospice nurses, if something has happened that's upsetting to you, get in your car, drive around the corner and call me. And then tell me your story. Tell me what happened, because you have to download whatever this horrific or unpleasant or whatever the experience. If you don't, it will stay inside of you and come out somehow. I recommend, and have been doing this with hospital workers during time of COVID, is to go home. When you go home at the end of your shift, the first thing you do is you get in the shower and you obviously wash off with soap and water, but then visualize that shower water coming down over your whole being and washing away all the intensity, the fear, the experiences. Let those, just watch them go down the drain. And when you feel them all gone, then let that light come over you and see that as that water as bright, brilliant light that's filling you with goodness and cleanliness. And then you can get out of the shower and know that you are not carrying with you the energies of the day. Our mind responds very, very well to ritual and to symbols. And that is a ritual that we're imprinting on our mind of we're letting go so that we can move forward and begin again.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love water.
There you go.
To just that whole washing away and the light, right? Because this can feel heavy and dark and
Right.
burdensome. And so one of the things that makes me think about something here that you talked about in your book is unrealized grief. So you say you will grieve the loss of your patient whether you know it or not. You've given them a piece of yourself, and having cared for them, you will grieve. The question is, how much? Some will touch you more than others. Some will remind you of people in your personal life. Some will even fill blank spaces in your life. All will affect you whether you are aware of it or not. That's, this is such an important part of our responsibility in self-care, and is to be self-aware, and not with, because denial is ignoring a problem or avoiding a problem, or just but the fact is that we all have a heart, and we all are in each other's field of energy, and so we don't realize what we're taking on, again, just vicariously.
Well, particularly those that work in end of life need to establish, again, a ritual, some kind of closure. And I recommend this for hospital work, anyone who is dealing with end of life, is to create your own ritual for closure. That may be buying a flower on your way home and from work and putting it in a special place with a candle, and recognize and say, Mr. Smith, thank you for coming into my life, and I wish you well on your journey, and light the candle and then blow it out. Or create a log book where you write Mr. Smith's name and just a couple of words or a couple of sentences about how he touched you, and then put the date of his death. You know, some kind of closure so that we can then move forward. If we don't have the closure, then it's like putting Mr. Smith in your pocket and you're carrying him with you forever. And every so often, something will happen in your life that will trigger Mr. Smith, and he'll pop up and go, oh yeah, here I am. So we need to have closure.
And what I'm hearing when you say that is gratitude. I hear the gratitude for the experience, and the pain. There's pain in these experiences, you know. There is where we don't feel we have any control at times too, because the control is not necessarily in our hands anymore. We can do so much, and to recognize and appreciate ourselves for what we were able to do. And the other thing that came to me was compassion, right? Compassion for ourselves and for the situation, to be able to sit with ourselves with whatever it is that we're feeling, and to allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel whatever it is, and let it move. Because it's when things stick and they get lodged, this is where this buildup can occur with time, you know. So, but you know, so those absolutely, with the rituals, it is important, because then it gives you something tangible to work with, right? Yeah, and repeatable. So it's that it's a practice that we can integrate into our daily practice of medicine, right? Not something else to do, but it's part of what we do to allow us to sustain
and to stay healthy, to stay
right.
being able to do the work that we do. Another practice that I encourage is, when you're in bed at night and before you go to sleep, say to yourself, what have I traded a day of my life for? What have I done today? What was good about today? You know, so that you don't go to bed on a heavy note. What was good about today? And come up with one thing. Maybe it was, I looked out the window and saw a star, or, you know, the birds were at the bird feeder today. If, you know, what good did you trade a day of your life for? And that kind of puts living in perspective.
Yeah, and the simplicity, when you say that, the simplicity of things, because it's not that anything is simple. You know, there's a lot of complexity in healthcare. A lot of co-founding things that make it very challenging and demanding.
Well, right now, our country, our whole planet is in disarray because of the pandemic, because of all sorts of things. And so in order for us to be healthy and to stay physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually healthy, just simply before you go to sleep at night, evaluate your day and find some good in it, will help the energy in this very tumultuous planet right now.
Yeah, and an exchange, because there's an exchange happening in service. There is an exchange. And as we're giving, and we are receiving, and to be open to that, to have an awareness as to what our presence to care means, right? That we are, our presence without words is very powerful. And it lends to what patients can receive without us putting our hands on them, without us saying a word to them. It's palpable. It's palpable. And to this level of practice, it's a practice to to be at that level of awareness. But it's also the thing that allows us to stay in check, to stay in check to what's going on. Because if we can walk in a room and be aware of how we feel prior to walking into the room, when we walk into the room, and acknowledge what's going on in us as we're in an interaction, as we're in a role of providing a service, a care, to stay present to what's going on in us, right, as we're in this relationship. And when we walk out the room, to be present to now, where are we here? Like, because these subtleties matter. They really matter. And it's part of us growing in this profession, to be able to stay and practice and be effective in our practice, that we're not mindlessly doing things and find ourselves in a situation. I just spoke to a gal I interviewed, and she found herself, she hasn't worked since the fall, burned out.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden we find ourselves depleted. So it's important as a regimen of self-care that healthcare professionals become more in tune to what's going on in us, and what we can control and what we're not able to control, and finding ways, like you're talking about, in ritual and regimen, that we can put in place for ourselves.
And we need to have our life in balance, all work and no play kind of thing. We need to get proper sleep. We need to eat properly. We need to be able to play. We need to balance our life so that it isn't all work. And I think particularly fix-it personalities tend to tip the scales heavily on all work and no play. And so we have to remember to keep our life balanced, and it's not all work.
Yeah, I tipped that scale. I did. And fun. Because everything that I had done felt so serious, like there was so much, right? And I invested, this is before I kind of learned how to work differently, but there was a point in time where I actually felt my body so depleted, so exhausted, that I feared losing my own life. And I didn't know how I got to that point, right? I didn't even see it coming, because I was so invested in my caring, right? And I work a lot with the chronic pain population at the time. And so my investment in helping patients to help themselves was really I felt in retrospect, as I learned to learn how to do different, was that there was a boundary, right? There's a boundary for me as a practitioner to recognize where my efforts stop, and they have to have an investment in their recovery. You know, what part do they play? Because we disempower patients as well if we don't ask them the questions that help them to step into their own awareness and their own process, and wherever they are, whatever point in time. Because even like that lady that I had, when we had our conversation, she felt empowered to make decisions the last few days of her life, right? As weak as she was, that was her decision, right? To do these things. And she felt empowered, and she felt a sense of peace to be empowered. And so we can help facilitate that for our patients, to put the ball back in their court, you know?
Mhm.
And it's beautiful when it happens, because you can see how there's a sense of ownership, right? That we're not losing ourselves in a process. Even though our physical life is ending, and that we don't have to lose ourselves or a sense of self, right? Self-worth. And that's an important thing that I don't think we really address at times to that degree, especially when things happen so quickly, you know? And then we just have to like adjust quick right now. Like, what do we do with this situation that we hadn't anticipated?
Well, in our healthcare system, we go to a physician and because something is wrong, and we really tend to turn our power over to that physician. A lot of people stop asking questions. They really do what they're told, but they don't have a real ownership in what is happening to them, whether it's their treatment or whatever. They have this sense of, you will fix it, and they don't have that inner self-power. And as healthcare professionals, it would behoove us to help the patient find their power. That's where the healing is. And if we can help them find that spot in themselves, then they have more autonomy, which we tend to lose in our healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, you know, and I think with I'm going to call it excuses of time constraint, productivity demands, financial constraints, that we feel that this is not feasible. And I completely disagree. And I believe that our model of care needs to shift. And we are at a point in time right now where things can shift with this COVID situation and the demand and the inconsistencies that's everywhere right now. Standard of care is all over the place. So as far as, but speaking of standard of care, the generalization of care based on purely evidence based is narrowing our scope of practice, because every patient is different, and we need to be able to recognize and honor each person and their situation and not make assumptions as we go, because that is also a thing. And when we're trying to fit people in a box, this just doesn't work, because you might have 3 people with the same diagnosis, but 3 people have very different life experiences, and we're trying to treat them all the same. So it doesn't work.
Well, and that goes back to our medical model, is that the medical model takes care of diseases, addresses diseases that people have, instead of addressing people that have diseases. And hopefully someday the medical model will open their eyes and see that these are human beings that they're working with, not just signs and symptoms that a disease presents.
Yes, and on that note, Barbara, that's really what it is about it. It's about people. We are in a profession to care for people, and to recognize each person, and not the bed that they're in, right? Strictly with the dollar value of that bed, because one of the things that I know is that the bed that my friend was in, her value to the hospital expired before she did. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's a whole nother subject matter, but and that's part of some of the decisions that come into play, right? When we are strictly looking at this budget of care, budget to care. And, for any of us, we certainly wouldn't want to be that person in the bed as a practitioner being treated like that. And so the system needs to look at the value of care. I mean, where their value is what I should say. What's our definition of care? What are the components to care? What does that look like? What does it feel like? I could go on that, but yeah. So, but I so appreciate all the literature that you have on end of life care and all kinds of. I have several of your books here. I mean, you have. Wow. So you have a lot of. I have several books here, and I think you have there's some other books, right? Several books. Can you just speak to some of what you have, Barbara, that if people would like to learn more about you, your services, your books?
Well, I would say go to my website, BK Books at bkbooks.com, or Google Barbara Karnes, and I have DVDs on end of life. I have booklets on signs of approaching death. I have a booklet that will guide the family on what to do in the hours to minutes before death to support their loved one. I have a booklet for a person that's been told they have a life-threatening illness, on how to live the best they can. I have a booklet on pain at end of life, because pain management is different at end of life than it is for someone who's going to get better. I have a booklet on dementia at end of life, because someone with dementia doesn't play by the rules. And so the signs of approaching death for someone with dementia is different than for someone who has a cancer, congestive heart failure, or some disease that's life-threatening. My focus in life has been to educate, to neutralize the fear that everyone brings with them to dying and to death. I think if you have knowledge, then that's going to reduce the fear and help you have a meaningful experience.
Well, I thank you for your service and your contribution to our system, to our practitioners, and to the patients that you serve, and the ripple effects of all of it, how beautiful that is. And I just, I greatly appreciate your time, and just, I'm in gratitude for the connection. It's important, and for practitioners who are listening, that the importance of taking care of yourself, when you are in person with your patients, wherever you are, because we are people. We're all people. And we made a decision to put ourselves in a direct line of care. We're in the trenches. We're getting dirty, it gets messy in there, and learning, like Barbara says, regimen and routine, having some ritual, take a shower, allow that to cleanse you, allow the light to come in, allow things to just, wash down, wash away, and, stay present to yourself. Open your heart to what you feel. Open your heart to your patients. Vulnerability is a strength. It's a strength when we can be present to ourselves and be present to others in this way that allows us to be authentic, to be real, to be in our heart, right? To be able to listen from a place that is, it's there, right? No words need to be said. It's a palpable space when we're in our heart. And Barbara, you're a blessing, you're a blessing. And I will put your information that people can find your books. And I would encourage people to look at them, read them, share them, that this is an important subject.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We've had a good discussion.
Yeah, well, you take good care of yourself, keep well, stay safe, and appreciate your time, Barbara.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care.